Hey everyone, let me welcome you to this really special podcast, which is being brought to you by the Geostrata and the Young Diplomats Society from Australia. Now, we are here, four young people, two from Australia and from India. We are here to discuss Quad, which, in our opinion, is the institution of the present and of the future. Now, to discuss that, we have with us my brilliant colleague from Geostrata. Her name is Agrima. But first, you guys know us. I would like to pass on the mic to our brilliant colleagues from YDS, to Oz and Thien, and if they can tell us something about themselves and their organization, and then we can begin. Over to you guys.
Thanks, guys. So thank you for introducing us. So Oz and I were chiming in from Melbourne. So I guess before we start, we'll start with a bit of an acknowledgement of country from, Australia. We begin today by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we record this podcast today and on which this podcast is published and listened to. And we pay our respects to their elders past and present. And we extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. And so I guess a little fun fact about me, which is maybe not that fun, but I'm studying a Bachelor's of Global Studies in International Relations, and I love it. I love, international affairs, so that's why I'm here. And a fun fact about, the YDS is that we are all youth and, we're all volunteers, and we all just come together to talk about international affairs. So it's a really good space for anyone just looking to connect with other people who are passionate about the same thing. And on to you, Oz.
Thanks, Tien. Hello, Geostrata. Hello, everyone. Feeling really honored to be doing this podcast. I'm kind of sad we're not talking about like cricket diplomacy with India and Australia, but I hope Geostrata has that episode and I'll be on talking about cricket because we have such two amazing cricketing nations. It's really awesome to be talking to other young people interested in international affairs and global politics. Sometimes we can seem a bit strange and philosophical and, we can't really talk about politics to our friends, but I think we come together and finally we have somebody that also is interested in this topic. And that's kind of what Young Diplomats is about. It's about this organization where like-minded people come, talk about these big issues in the world. And we hope to, and I think we are one of the leading international youth networks in Australia. And so it gives us great privilege to be talking about Quad. It's a really fun topic, even though when you do Google Quad, it comes up with quad motorbikes and the quad muscle. So it still hasn't broken into the internet. But I think today, hopefully, that discussion will touch a lot on its new endeavors and its interesting path that it's taking.
All right. Amazing. And maybe I think we can play a part in helping Quad breaking into the internet in our own little way. Now, I'm so glad that we have the two of you here, and I also have Agrima. But let's get straight on. Okay, let me, tell me something about what's the Australian perspective on Quad, right? And let me elaborate upon that because in India, Quad is really getting, a lot popular, and it is very popular. Now, Quad, if we look back some time ago, it used to be okay, let me find the correct way to put it. It used to be a temporary, coalition. And now it's something much more regular, it's something much more strategic, and Quad is getting more institutionalized on the way. So, can you tell us something about what regional developments happen in Australia? What changed in Australia that Australia came on board to support this temporary coalition that was once upon a time to something that's much more regular and strategic as of now?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So obviously, like with Quad, it started off as this, as you touched on, this humanitarian thing, and I think it still is there. When we look at US, Japan, Australia, and India, they do care about these humanitarian issues in the region because there is quite a few, and the most recent one was the Myanmar earthquake, and so Quad came together, put some money in. I think it was 30 million. US into humanitarian earthquake relief. So the humanitarian aspect is still there in Quad, which I think is a good thing. Helping our neighbours, and I think Australians care about that sort of stuff. Some of the big ones as well have been, in the region, especially during the tsunami, that affected Australians a lot because we love to go to Bali. Bali is kind of like our second home. So when the tsunami happened, Australians really came together for that. And so I think the humanitarian aspect is there, but we've obviously seen a change in recent years. This might actually be interesting for your viewers to know is that the way Australia views itself. So Australia, it's seen as a Western country, and it has those kind of liberal values, and even its image that it portrays to kind of the world is kind of that kind of white Australia sometimes. But if you see where we're geographically located, we're located in the Asian region, the Asia Pacific region. And so Australia, maybe over the last 20, 30 years, but definitely after the 20 years, has really pivoted towards Asia in terms of caring about what's happening in the region, caring about, who are the people in this region, and wanting to do more trade and have some more bilateral relationships. One of our biggest trading partners is China economically. But Australia has this kind of push and pull relationship with China. And so over the years, Australia's relationship has sometimes been on really good terms with China and then sometimes really difficult times with China. And I think those sort of kind of steps that Australia has taken towards, whether it's its maritime security, security around trade, cyber security, even after COVID as well, has really shaped, from an Australian perspective, what Quad means. And I think it aligns with, especially America's view. Australia and America tend to be quite close together when it comes to national security. And Japan and Australia have always had kind of a very good relationship. And Australia and India, even more recently, are starting to build this relationship. So I think the humanitarian is there because it's our region. We want to help, but with new technology, especially like in infrastructure, you're looking at science. These countries are quite like the leaders in these areas. So I think it just goes without saying they would want to work together. So I think that's how it's changed. But I would definitely say, for an Australian perspective, it's that relationship with China. And just to give you another really interesting fact or like observation, when I was in high school, Australia's relationship with China was very positive. So you had Australian students wanting to work in China, even teach in China. This is in 2014. But now the relationship with China is quite, low, and you wouldn't see that same enthusiasm.
You know,
I think. Oh,
okay,
sorry.
Tian, please go ahead.
Sorry, I was just saying, I think just adding on that Oz, like we were talking about how, Oz graduated in 2014 in high school. And I'm so sorry to show your age, Oz. I graduated in 2021. And so I think when I was in high school, people going to China was not any, like there was nothing about it throughout my high school, and especially because it was during COVID as well and those economic sanctions were happening, that really changed, the way that Australia views China and how, this diplomatic, need is, I guess, has been, yeah, increased. So yeah, it's really interesting to see, I guess, that difference in such short amount of time. And yeah.
All right. So, when Oz was talking about, I'm happy that you brought in China, very well along into the conversation because, that's what everyone really wonders about Quad. Like, Quad gets seen into, in relation with China that, oh, are you with China or are you not so much with China? That's something that already exists. Now, again, you also talked about how Quad is humanitarian in its aspect, but that's just the start of Quad, right? Humanitarian was how Quad started, but I don't think so. Everyone or anyone who talks about Quad wants to know about, wants to know in depth about such humanitarian aspects because people know about that already. But I think the conversation is about, okay, you guys started as a humanitarian coalition. now what? Now where are you heading? And that question, somehow implicitly, China is hidden into that, how far is Quad has to do with China? And that's something that I would like to come to about AUKUS as well. But for now, Agrima, you can go ahead.
Yeah, that was certainly talking about China, but something that came across another important part when we talk about Quad, particularly, I think it talks about how there is unity, but despite that, we talk about different initiative of every country. Let's say India's non-alignment, Japan's constitutional pacifism, and Australia's AUKUS, as Pratyaksh was just mentioning. So, in that view, is it strategic divergence as a strength, or is it just something that we are disguising over?
I think I'll take the reign on this one, Oz. I think it's really interesting because I guess the Quad isn't a traditional alliance because, each member they engage based on their national interests and there's not really as much of an obligation to commit. That's how I see it at least. And that means that they don't demand that same type of alignment, but they still respect the diversity of the different countries while still pursuing the same shared goals. So I guess when I look at a lot of the shared goals, it is that they want a free and open and rules-based Indo-Pacific, which I think is definitely the glue of the Quad. Even if, they're exact priorities differ, there's still that consensus on the core issues, such as maritime security and cyber resilience. And so I guess they have that same shared threat perception in a way, because even though it's through different lenses, all states see China's assertiveness, whether that's militarily or economically or diplomatically, they see it as a concern and they see it through their own lens. So I guess if you take India, for example, it sees China as a direct military and geopolitical competitor. I'd love you to go a bit more into depth with this, but I'll give a little briefing. So, they share a border. So there's that layer of territorial tension that the other countries don't have. And India is really focused on maintaining its status. It's a rising global power and it wants to protect its strategic autonomy. So while it is quite active in the Quad, I would say that it's also a little bit more careful not to fully align, because I think that non-alignment is still a big part of its foreign policy identity. What's next? Japan, I think, is a bit more worried about China's build-up and their maritime coercion, in the East China Sea, for example. So for them, the Quad is a way to promote a free and an open Indo-Pacific while they're still staying within the pacifist, as you said, constraints of their constitution. And then if you look at Australia, I think Australia is a bit more complicated because we still see China as a major trade partner, but at the same time, we've faced a lot of economic coercion and we're really concerned about growing Chinese influence. And you hear this everywhere. You're like, China's taking over in the South Pacific, which has really pushed Australia to position itself as a regional stabilizer, because it is seen as often a middle power. You hear that a lot, that they can use the Quad to hedge against any risk while it's still backing this rules-based international order. And then what's next? Oh, the US, of course. And they see China as a long-term strategic rival. And I guess, that's not just militarily, but also China really challenges their liberal and their democratic values and, its way in the global leadership. So, for example, the TikTok ban, I think that's a big one. It's part of that concern over systemic competition. And the US sees the Quad as this, deterrent strategy. And it's basically a soft alliance, I would say, that helps them build these type of connections and coalitions without that need for a formal treaty. So I guess in saying all of that, we can see how they all use Quad in different ways and they engage on their own terms, which overall it makes the Quad a lot less threatening and a more of a soft way to engage with others in the region. And just to the second part of your question, I think that each country in that brings a really unique capability, because whether it's military power or diplomacy or tech, that mix really makes the Quad really versatile and also really multidimensional. And also because there's so many different countries, it gives a group a lot of credibility across the region, because, you know, in India's strategic autonomy, it really reassures ASEAN countries, for example, that the Quad isn't just a Western bloc. And Japan, they have a more pacifist stance, which, you know, that adds moral legitimacy in itself. And the US is the US, you know, it's a big leader. It brings a big global strategic weight. And of course, Australia in its middle power diplomacy in the Indo-Pacific especially. So yeah, I think that what really sets Quad apart is that ability to be flexible, because it's not a hard alliance, you know, it's not NATO or anything, you know, really set. So the countries aren't forced into agreement on every issue, and they can, I would say, they can pick and choose where their interests align and what makes cooperation easier. And, you know, it avoids spooking other regional partners as well, who might be a bit more cautious about these formal alliances. So I think that's a big thing as well.
Thank you for that. That very importantly outlines how Quad is basically unique, and how Quad right now is bringing up new perspective that alliances that existed before it doesn't bring with it. I think I completely agree with you that any organization of such international stature will only exist and will continue to evolve only if it is flexible in nature, like Quad is trying to be, while being cooperative and still giving a different nuance for every country to evolve their own strategies. With that, I think YDS can take up us and next question for us.
Yeah, sure. I'm also going to ask a little minor question as well. The TikTok ban is very interesting to me because it was so big in India, right? At one stage, TikTok. It's still here in Australia, and I know Donald Trump didn't ban TikTok either after his election. But my question is more focused on if how Indians see Quad, if it's seen as a more symbolic partnership, or do you see it as something that truly influences India's strategic posture?
I think I will take that question up. I think it's important, and something that we started up this conversation with, that how we see Quad, particularly maybe started with a humanitarian cause and maybe started on more of a diplomatic side, but it is increasingly becoming a more important strategic approach that India has in the Indo-Pacific. And it goes beyond the symbolism and tokenistic symbol in the international global framework. I think it also stems from the part that we are now started to coordinate with each other over security, over economics, and even technology. So, which shifts the paradigm and which shifts the view to like of India and how India see Quad, plus how India try to engage with all these nations as part of Quad. The aim, I believe, is not just to counterbalance a single nation, let's say China for that, suppose, but it is to actively secure the cooperative regional order, which I think we also talked about initially in our podcast, how we are trying to stabilize the region rather than making it more hostile in nature. So I think that is something that enough proves for itself that it's not just a symbol, but it's more of a cooperative framework that India tries to approach. Either it is through its initiative like Ports for Future Partnership, where we try to cooperate each other over maritime connectivity, or is it with AI Engage initiative, where we are trying to balance out how AI powered agriculture can something be the future looking forward to. So all these initiative, I think, uh, talk about establishing more of a, rather than a symbolic partnership, more of a more stable, connective partnership with each other.
Yeah, I actually really agree with that, because I think that the idea of Quad as a way to stabilize the region, it makes a lot of sense, especially when you look at their initiatives and the way that they respond to threats as well. I have one question for you that I've been dying to ask, actually, just because I hear a lot of rhetoric about India being someone who, makes a lot of big and ambitious statements, but might take a long time to translate them into actual policy. And I think that's a thing that we hear all the time. And so I just wanted to ask, from your perspective, do you think that that's a fair reading, or, maybe does it reflect a different strategic rhythm, I guess, in Indian diplomacy? Like, is that just the way they work, or yeah?
Ajay, I think as an Indian, my answer is going to be to that question is, pretty obvious, but I'd love for myself to sort of describe upon it and sort of now tell you. But before I do that, I just quickly like to come back to Oz minor question, and I would like to give a minor answer, which was about, the TikTok ban and everything. And it was like, as you said, it was pretty big I mean, TikTok as a platform is like, really big, and it was getting big in India as well. Now, the reasons why we sort of came up for blocking it was more on the sides of because we thought that, the data of Indians, a lot of personal data, was a sort of, we were not sure where that data is going. And that was the reason that we banned TikTok. And since then, I mean, TikTok was always a popular platform, but its political implications have been coming across, because since the ban that India has banned TikTok, we've heard so much about how TikTok as a medium has been utilized to swing maybe people's perceptions from one area to another. Now, of course, that's legitimate if you allow an app to exist, in your country. But I think what TikTok has now become is that its political implications have become much more clearer, which, and but then I think that's also because political parties or candidates have been, really able to utilize a social media platform which was maybe meant to, share your, how should I say, your casual moments to, something that's political. For example, I think Zohran Mamdani led, a big campaign on TikTok when it came to, his candidature in New York. But coming back to Thien's question, which is, I agree that there is this perception that, India, wants to, it will announce something big and then maybe, that thing does not translate. But, I would say it is a how should I say, it's a wrong implication of what, or wrong perception of what India is. I'll tell you why. Because when it comes to Quad, right, there are some noises about that maybe India is the one who, somehow is not ready to take that step, that one step. Nobody wants to say what that one step is, but it's like, almost like, oh, maybe you guys are not doing that. And I think that has to do with something, again, when it comes to China. I think maybe it is America, or maybe the West, or maybe let's just say a lot of nations expect, India to announce that yes, it is an anti-China grouping, and yes, we stand against China, something, and that's something that, of course, Quad is not. So on that front, people, institutions, think tankers, everyone perceives that, oh, if America is coming into a grouping, and that to an Indo-Pacific, oh, we're absolutely sure it must be something, very anti-China or nefarious against China. And that's something that people, or again, a lot of people expect India to, explicitly state that yes, we are so and so, and we mean against China. Now, that's something that India is not going to do now. But another thing is, now let's forget about China for a moment. Uh, I think America, or the other members, I'm not really sure as much about Japan, although now their defense spending is also increasing. Japan used to be really pacifist, and now they are, you see the visuals of their army doing beach trainings and a lot of military training. So I think maybe the tide is changing. So when it comes to Quad, okay, let's forget the humanitarian angle, let's forget the China angle. I think the next step for Quad, which a lot of people, including America itself, and maybe Australia, you can tell us if that's the perception of Australia as well, is that people are now expecting Quad to somehow become a militarized alliance, at least if not completely. I mean, of course, not like NATO, but they want Quad to have a military pillar as well, a hardcore security pillar, apart from the non-traditional security, apart from the humanitarian angle. Now, I don't, as of now, I don't think so. India has problems with it, but maybe India wants to not put it out in the open, but that's just my view. But times are changing. For example, 10 years ago, who thought that when we would face a terrorist attack from Pakistan, India would go out and then say that, another act of terrorism means act of war? That's something that 10 years ago you wouldn't really expect India to do. So maybe if, whatever the time continues the way it's going, maybe I would assume it's sooner than, when Quad also says that, hey, we are this humanitarian alliance, we have the non-traditional security in the Indo-Pacific, but here we also have, how should I say, this military pillar to Quad. But that's something that, that's what I think.
No, there's a lot there, and it's interesting because, like, you hear this term working groups, right? Like when these international diplomats they go to these forums, like to the Quad summit, they have these. It sounds very cute. They're having their little meeting on the side, having their working groups. But I think what we can see from these working groups is on the point that you really articulated really well is that like it's going a bit more deeper and in more depth about the relationship other than China and humanitarian. Like these working groups are looking at things like cybersecurity. They're looking at artificial intelligence. They're looking at climate change. It seems like sadly climate change has been put on the back burner ever since COVID, but climate change is still being spoken about. Green shipping lanes and these sort of things. And it's not just about security in the hard sense, but more about like how do we build up the technology and countering, cyber attacks. And I think in 2021 there was a Quad senior cyber group that was formed to do that and to maintain kind of this peace in the area. So yeah, these working groups are looking at these things, and there's investment in this. There's also this idea of like investing in new technology, so like in radio as well, in radio access networks, and also these kind of roundtable discussions on maybe not like you do hear this thing about like this Asian NATO. I don't think it's there at that stage, and I think Australia's kind of position on Australian NATO or like Orcus in particular, it's very clear now where Australia stands with its kind of hard power, because its investment in Orcus is huge, and so what we're looking at in Orcus is these nuclear run submarines and Australia's border security. Like if you look at Australia, we're surrounded by water, and so that's really important for Australia. But in terms of like the Indo-Pacific for Australia, the security of like free movement and in terms of if trade, and I think these countries, they all are democracies. So like you'll hear this idea, you hear it a lot, the rules-based order. We want to make sure the security of the rules-based order, because at the end of the day, Australia is in this region where countries are connected, maybe have good relationships with China as well. So that balancing act is always going to be there. But Australia and these other countries have made it very clear that we want to make sure the Indo-Pacific is free. You will hear this, a free Indo-Pacific. They had a recent meeting in Washington where all the Quad foreign ministers met, and you kept hearing this, free Indo-Pacific being out there. So yeah, I hope that answers your question around like kind of security, but it's kind of in cyber awareness, artificial intelligence. Even there's going to be a fellowship for STEM leaders, in science and technology.
All right. Okay. So, I would have something to ask on that front. And again, I would like to raise also a minor question related to that is that, when it comes to, Quad, we're talking about tech, Thien sort of emphasized upon tech, how tech remains one of the pillars. And the other pillar that we're talking about is security, right? A defense, because as I said, security is really important for Australia, given that you're surrounded by waters all along. Now, on that front, tech and defense are one of the two most foremost pillars of Quad. So, where do you think in terms of tech and defense, we are doing enough, or there are still gaps between what the ambitions that we have and something that we're actually doing. And was AUKUS, and here's my minor question, was AUKUS somehow, when Australia decided to go with AUKUS, was that somehow related to this mismatch in Quad's ambitions and what we're doing currently right now? What do you have to say on that?
So I guess it's a tough question. Tian, you're thinking as well about how to answer this. Maybe if you could clarify a bit about like kind of, so your perception is that like Australia investing in AUKUS is kind of a mismatch between Quad's alignment, or is it related in a
No, no,
sense?
no. Okay, what I'll do is, so for example, my question initially was that when we look at Quad, technology and defense, they are, let's just say, one of the key pillars of Quad's agenda. Now, what I want to know is that where do you think, when it comes to technology or defense, where is the promise lies the most, right? Where can Quad do more on tech and defense? And maybe when you decided to go with AUKUS, was that like a decision that was somehow related to Quad, that maybe you were like, oh, Quad is just humanitarian, let us go with something that's much more hardcore in terms of security? Or was it an independent decision which did not really take Quad into account?
Mm. Yeah, Tian, did you want to take that, or it's?
Sorry, I'm just having a think. Let me think.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, I think it's probably more independent. I don't think it like it's sometimes there's this idea that like the strategy and sovereignty sometimes they will align. So Australia's strategy in the region aligns with its sovereignty. But I think when you look at AUKUS, it is the UK and the US, and this idea of like really investing in the technology, the military technology, whereas Quad, like you mentioned, has this kind of there are other means of diplomatic ways, strategies, investing in the region, making sure that there's safety in the Indo-Pacific. So I think AUKUS is quite direct and quite upfront about what it is. It's like, yes, this is what we're doing. We have these nuclear run submarines, which are going to be better for keeping our, for example, our enemies at bay, because these submarines don't need to come up as much as regular submarines, and they're much more powerful, much more stealth. So I think that's very hard power. Whereas a lot of the stuff that you see that Quad is doing does fall in back into that kind of new technology, AI. Like even there's stuff around agriculture. How do they build on new forms of agriculture? I think Agrima mentioned about the ports, about the ports that are coming through as well. So yeah, I think they are slightly. They have some parallels, but I think the one's clearly very hard power, and the other one is still a bit
Yeah.
soft in a way. Yeah.
Yeah, I think definitely what you said, Osbrain's true, and I definitely agree with that. And I'm pretty sure that they are technically separate. I don't think that one made the other happen. But I think in an environment where the Indo-Pacific is shifting and China's becoming a lot more assertive, you can see how Australia and the US needs to deepen their partnerships in both. And I think that they definitely complement each other, like Oz said, because like it does. I think AUKUS, it does what the Quad can't, because the Quad, since they are such a loose alliance, they can't do anything militarily as much, just because they have differences in that. And like I think India as well, they don't agree with AUKUS. So that's another thing that, is a bit rocky as well. But yeah, so AUKUS handles a bit more of the hardcore defense side, whereas Quad is a bit more about strategic coordination. And I think in that way, they really reinforce each other because they benefit from each other in doing that. And from Australia's perspective, we have these two initiatives where we can counter China. And so I guess they are two parts of the same broader strategy, but I don't think that they came from, one single, strategy, if that makes sense. I'm not sure if it does, but yeah.
Mhm. I have a question for the Geostrata team. If you think like these issues that that we have in Quad, do you think they should be, some of them should be dropped, or entirely, like completely, we should get rid of some of the issues in Quad, or should we just put a pause on them, either because they're too ambitious, or maybe they're too crowded with other actors? So what is your thoughts on that?
I think that's an important question that you point out. And given that Quad's agenda is expanding every day, with in in fact, like very recent years, we see how it's naturally bringing up more issues, more challenges. So with that, we also see a room where there are problems in prioritization and how the Quad agendas is aligning with other regional efforts. So giving that and keeping that in mind, particularly, I think there comes a little line that Quad needs to draw in the agendas that it gets involved in, agenda which it doesn't get involved. I won't say it's too ambitious, but one reality is also that, let's say, how Quad initiative overlaps with the organizations that were mentioned even in this podcast earlier, like ASEAN. So giving that as the prime example, in these kind of cases, I think it was more strategic for Quad particularly to coordinate more closely with the existing framework rather than unintentionally appearing to compete, because then it becomes like more hostile environment, and neither Quad, I think, nor ASEAN have that agenda in mind to make the Indo-Pacific more hostile in nature. Rather, it's how the neighborhood can be more friendly and how the countries can coordinate better and how the countries can achieve their goals together. So in those kind of areas, maybe Quad can have like take a little slower pace. But on another hand, what we have and what we see is this rapid technology which is going around in every nation. We see how there is every nation going towards AI, how nations are more and more adapting towards these new technologies which are coming in place. So in that, we might think of a Quad as an organization that these nations can go ahead and collaborate with rather than compete with, or see as at a competing force, and Quad can basically provide the framework for these nations to come together and like work together in order to have a more uh, futile exercise rather than just sitting back and increasing up the effectiveness. So I think the key that Quad needs to have is to balance out in the way that it is flexible, but at the same time, it is addressing those shared challenges. Again, going back to the questions and the conversation that we were having earlier during this podcast about how the international organization needs to have flexibility in order to be relevant in and evolving during a time rather than existing as a non-flexible entity. So I think for Quads to continue its relevance and its effectiveness, it needs to derive that fine line between, okay, this is an area which I want to involve with, and this is an area which will be better with me stepping back and like not getting involved with, rather than being all over the place.
Yeah, 100%. It seems like that if there's resilience in these kind of avenues, whether it's technology or maritime security, uh, inevitably it like makes the region more prosperous for everybody. And there's this idea, I guess it's like, okay, if the region is secure, then everyone can be economically prosperous. We can innovate, and that's good for everyone. And I think that's kind of what's coming through in your answer. Is that correct?
Yeah, that was rightly summarizing up my answer. Another interesting question that I had was, we talked about, or O's basically talked about, that technology governance, climate action, inclusive diplomacy, or all these actions that Quad is going ahead and taking up. Then what is the unique perspective or skill that young people like we all bring to Quad agenda, and how are we collaborating and contributing to this involvement? What do you think about this?
I'll probably take the reins on this one and then you can jump in, Oz. I think that young people, it's really interesting because they bring something really unique to Quad because, not just because we are the next generation, but because we're already living in the world that I guess the Quad is trying to shape. And so I guess when you think about tech governance, as youth, we are digital natives, and we grow up with technology, and see. I guess it's something that we're more used to. So these issues are really, really interesting to me, at least, and I think I've wrapped my head around it a little bit more. When it comes to climate action, I think that's also a bit more of a personal issue for us as well, because I guess as youth, it affects our futures and our families, and I guess the world that our families will grow up in, and our jobs as well. So I guess that makes us a bit more motivated to push for bold action and not just like policy talk, I would say. And I think that type of urgency and that type of personal connection can bring a lot of energy as well to the Quad agenda, which is really, really interesting. Like, I know you guys just had a Quad summit, a youth Quad summit, which is so cool to see, young people talking about Quad like that in that type of environment. And I think we also have a different idea of what diplomacy can look like as well, because it's not just, in my perspective at least, it's not something that's just between foreign ministers behind closed doors, but you can see it through social media and like through cultural exchanges as well, the way that we're talking as well. And these changes that can really have such weight in educating and others, and it's made like advocating for change so different, and that's really impacted the global environment and the way that these organizations work. And so I think that that's where Quad has a really big opportunity, because these things like the youth-led climate campaigns, or even tech startups or things like that, like these are forms of diplomacy too. So that's really important to think about. And as youth, we are the future, so I think that Quad should definitely reflect that. Did you have anything else to say, Oz, as well?
No, I completely agree. I think what you're saying is spot on. We're almost doing that, especially like, when Geostrata came to us, the platform that you guys have is in its way like building that relationship with us here in Australia. Where we're talking about these important topics. So, but we have that idea of hopefully, health and time, and we also have that, you know, new technologies, understanding this from a perspective of like, you know, everyone now has access to the phone and internet, and I'm sure that it's the case in India with a growing middle class having this access to the internet where they can see what's happening in the world, and same with Australia. So we can connect even more now. Before it might have just been like movies, and you get a few movies a year or TV shows, but now it's like we can connect so much, and we can really understand how young people in India are feeling and where they want to move forward. And these countries that we're talking about, America, Japan, India, and Australia, these are huge cultural powerhouses. They are cultural powerhouses in the sense of what they bring in terms of like culture, language, technology, obviously like science and the STEM subjects as well. So why not connect more and bring that to the table? Sometimes I think these old ways of doing things, which we were talking about, these kind of ways of like, yeah, forums are great and they help, but if we can continue to get people connecting via the internet, talking with each other, I think that will even bring up more opportunities, from my perspective.
All right.
Yeah, that really sums up. And thank you for pointing out how connection becomes like a core of the youth, because I think that particular narrative building and how youth connect with each other, regardless of like how diplomats engage in closed room, is so different. So that certainly brings out new perspective. It brings out new narratives and help each other, like youth of different countries, to understand each other more. But like taking this for example, we are understanding you guys more and your guys are understanding us more, and talking about how we will be also going back home with like a different perspective and narrative of how we are connecting with each other. So I think that certainly brings like something unique to the table when young voices like ours get that stage out. Yes, Pratyaksh, you were saying.
I think, I think, again, we've had so many discussions about Quad, about, what does it mean? What was it in the past? What was it? What will it be in the future and other things? But I think, if, not to sort of glaze our own selves, but like, if Quad has to go ahead and maybe, become more militaristic or, expand or maybe, have its headquarters or have its secretariat, something on that front, I think more of this is needed, more conversations, honest conversations where, Australians, Indians, maybe Japanese and Americans, we come together and, we talk and it just not, if it just happens on the government to government level, maybe, that's good. That's the starting point, but it's more of the civil society or things apart from the government that needs to come together and have these conversations, because if we do that, then we're able to build a broader consensus, which then translates into eventually the governments getting together. But I think so far that's been a wonderful conversation as of yet. Now this is the first time that people are seeing Strata and YDS, but this won't be the last time, because we will keep coming back, not just with Quad, but other things as well. But if the team of ideas has any other question, we're happy to answer it. If not, then we are pretty happy to close this conversation as of yet.
I have one
Um,
question.
yeah.
Uh, so my question is to you guys. Yeah, what is the feeling for young Indian youth at the moment in terms of issues that concern them? Like if I was to tell you about Australia's issues right now for young people, it's about housing affordability. It's about the climate crisis. It's about like how do our degrees translate to jobs? I would love to know while we have this opportunity. Yeah, how do the Indian youth feel at the moment? Is it prosperous? Are there challenges?
Oh, I mean, I could go on and speak about it as young people speak about it for hours, maybe, right? But I think, okay, so I would like to sort of contextualize it and then sort of, come at the problems. Now, of course, I think the young people in India, of course, there are opportunities, but talking about the problems, you don't tend to find, as you said, okay, we do these expensive colleges and expensive degrees. But now degrees don't mean jobs anymore. Like you could have the fanciest of the degrees from the fanciest of the college, and maybe you enter the market and go like, no one's really looking for your degrees, right? Or maybe at least not in most cases. So of course we're facing problems when it comes to jobs. That's one thing, and and then there are a plethora of, let's just say, secondary challenges, which is climate change. Now I'm not saying climate change is secondary in importance, but as a young people, first you want to fend for yourself, right? You need a job, you need to settle eventually, because you need to prove to the society, maybe to your friends, maybe to your parents that, hey, I'm someone who did this, whatever education, and now I need a job. And then there's health, there are so many other things. But I think, and as you said, so I think as young people, we are facing similar sets of challenges, be it in Australia or be it in India. But I think that has to do with how the world or maybe the economy is moving, because I remember there's this economist, and he's like an influencer economist, but really famous, big in the UK. He talked about how his father was a janitor, or used to clean the floors in the railways or in one of the tubes of the London Railway. And he said that despite his father being that, he was able to afford somehow to buy property for himself, send his kids to Oxford, which, is expensive now, right? And, and could afford 5 children. But guess what? If any of us have to do that in our generation, really need to be able to become some really big shot person to be able to do that. And now I think people, so okay, I'm not talking about the exceptions, because the exceptions of course can afford, but I think for a normal person who's, maybe he's not able to act, or maybe he's not able to sing or do something special, and he's just, or he or she or they or them, they're just normal people who are doing their education from a college. I think on that front, life is becoming a bit difficult, because you really have to, and I see a lot of young people, myself around, everyone just striving to be the special one, you know. And maybe that's not because you inherently want to be special one, but maybe I think that's because you realize that to be able to, afford good things and, just do basic stuff, you need to be able to special. I think that's the contrast, that to be able to do basic things, something that you would expect a young person to be able to do, you almost need to do some special things to be able to, afford these things. And then, of course, there's climate change, there's health things, there's like, how should I say, there's global risk as well. As a young person, you tend to have so many opinions on the world around it. So I think lots of challenges for young people, and I wish somehow we're all able to, make it. That's, I would say on that.
Yeah, that's definitely so, it reigns so true. And I can definitely see how like relatable that is to Australia as well. Like if you're looking at housing affordability, and the housing crisis is just crazy in Australia. And also, the job market is really saturated as well. So it's really interesting to see, I guess, how the world and the economy and these, job markets as well, they're shifting so quickly. And as you said before, the tide is turning. I really like that phrase. But yeah, like it's really interesting to see. And yeah, hopefully it all improves in the future. We'll see. Only time will tell. But I think from Oz and I, that's probably all the questions we have, unless you have anything else, Oz.
I have one minor thing, and then maybe, we started this conversation with quad, but we also started this conversation with cricket. And, this time the Border Gavaskar Trophy was really interesting, although Australia sort of, nicked this off this time. Now, the next time Australia is going to be in India, and, India is like really waiting to play a good host for Australia and, probably be able to give it back what we received in Australia. But that's just something I think, again, as I said, that makes it for another conversation. Maybe we should do a live stream, whenever India and Australia are playing next, maybe for like, 10 minutes when the testing match is like about to end or something. But yeah, so far, really happy with this conversation with Quad. We have a Quad summit also coming up in India. And yeah, I mean, I think people will keep hearing from Strata and YDS. Thank you so much, guys, for your time. Love talking to you. And yeah, let's keep crossing each other paths more often than not.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much to both of you as well. It's been so good to chat. And yeah, I feel like I've learned a whole new perspective as well. So I'm sure Oz feels the same. It's been really, really good. And I really hope we do have more episodes and more chats in the future.
Okay, thank you so much, guys. Have a great day
Thank
ahead.
you. Thanks, everyone.